premature consensus, or even consensus at all, if you ask some people, excludes a lot of voices, a lot of people. And at least in our website, we want it to be a place where there can be a more raucous hearing of all views. Now, obviously, are we perfect at that? No, but it's the sort of guiding spirit.
Santiago Ramos, welcome to the Hope Axis. This is my 26th episode because I am an overachiever out of, sheer anxiety and fear of death. Also, I'm an Eastern European, so, it really comes with the programming. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm a huge fan of Wisdom of Crowds. I know it's actually Sam Kimberly explained to me that the title was ironic. I did not get it. I actually do believe in the Wisdom of Crowds. I'm just finishing my talk-field reading group on interintellect, where we do talk a lot about the things that only groups know. There is something to that as well.
Yeah.
Today we will talk a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know if Sam's answer is the official answer, because the answer I always give is that sometimes it is ironic and sometimes it's not.
Oh my God. Okay.
There's some crowds you do trust.
Yeah, we have to talk about the postmodern interpretation of titles a little bit today, and the general 21st century exegetics that involve the crowd in assessing the wisdom of the crowds, which is already a very meta proposition. We will talk about public philosophy, which I think is the obsession that connects our work. Interintellect obviously is a great experiment at this. The sources, the motivations, the themes, the rhythm, the cadence, but also the limitations of what kinds of philosophy you can do in public. We recently had Nadia Asparova on Interintellect at a salon. She was talking about anti-mimetics, her wonderful new book that explores the theme of the hidden idea, the incubation out of plain sight of the general public, and that also is important in many ways. You are the executive editor of Wisdom of Crowds, that was founded by Shadi and Demir in 2019. You joined early last year, so you've had a 1.5-year tenure, a very, turbulent 1.5 years when it comes to journalism and public philosophy alike. You are also affiliated with the Aspen Institute, working on public philosophy projects there. You write for Plough, you write for Common Will, exceptional magazines, beautiful literary criticism, and investigations of the public's morale and where kind of our collective psychology is heading. You recently wrote some excellent pieces on cultural innovation, citing one of the Joyas of the two that we love on Interintellect as well. And you've shared also your reflections on Rose Douthat's interview with an AI researcher looking at a future that might leave a limited space for humans to explore and exist in or even work in. Santiago,
that's the nicest way to put it.
It's a euphemistic way of putting it. Welcome to the Hope Axis, 26th episode. Tell us, what makes you hopeful today? I'm so curious to start in deep waters with you. I know you can take it.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, for having me on. You've had illustrious guests, and I feel honored to be them. Maybe unmerited, but also I have to say that
they all feel that way. It's so funny. Whoever you invite, and that's what I love about America. Even the most successful people retain a little bit of doubt. Am I maybe just a newbie? This never crosses the mind of even newbie French people. So it's the reason why Tocqueville came here.
And I have to say that I discovered Wisdom of Crowds as a reader the same time I discovered Interintellect, which was the summer of 2020 when most of us were locked down and exploring the internet, looking for connections. And I remember seeing random Interintellect tweets, and I was like, oh, there's some hope. There's still activity going on, and it was a nice little thing to discover. But yeah, what gives me hope? And
you already Interintellect gave you hope. I love that. This was
yeah. I didn't even mean to say that. Yeah. Well, there you go. That's my answer.
Paid appearance. It's not like everything is just subterfuge. And Santiago is here to promote Interintellect. No. We have freedom of speech on the Hope Axis.
That's right. No, I think that is a good practical evidence of what I actually think gives me hope, which is human beings are still congregating and still talking. There's William Faulkner, the great Southern writer, American writer, who, by the way, I think is still more popular in Latin America than he is in the United States these days. He influenced a
It's very
generation of.
popular in Hungary, actually.
Oh yeah,
Hungarian translations are very, very well known and beautiful.
yeah. There's quite a few American writers that are more popular abroad than at home. But anyway, when he won the Nobel Prize, he gave a speech that I always think about when it comes to hope. And um, he says this was in the '60s, I think. He said a lot of people today um, have a thought in their brains, which is when will I be blown up? Um, and he says, so he starts with that image, but then he says, um, when, and he says, at the end of time, I have hope for the end of time. Why? Not merely because human beings will still just be talking, but because human beings will still be living these dramatic and meaningful lives, living the peak experiences of the human condition and reflecting on them and writing about them. So he says something like, it's not that human beings will still be there talking, but they're still going to be thriving. And this is an incomplete answer, but it's good enough to start, I think. So in that dark time, which was COVID, and I think it's darker than we remember. Maybe I think we blocked. Depends on the person, obviously, but for me, it was dark. It was very lonely because I was living by myself and I was locked down. To have a window into still flourishing humans is a sign of hope, and I think it sort of reveals a little bit of what we think hope is.
What do you mean by flourishing? So, say it's the end times and half of the world is on fire, the other half is dying of some disease, there is a nuclear catastrophe, and AI is reprogramming the feeder tube of your baby to like make him less smart because whatever test of his ankle muscles proved that he will never, make it to the upper 1% of society because he won't be able to play golf. How is that flourishing?
Well, that was a very quick dystopian picture you drew there. So
You said
thanks for
end
that.
times. I didn't say that.
Well, yeah, that's true. Well, Faulkner. Um, I think flourishing. What is it? Well, I okay. So there was an essay. I forgot who wrote it, but my wife likes it a lot. It's like against human flourishing because that phrase has been overused maybe and kind of is
It's
imprecise.
like the Paul Bloom thing, like against
Right.
empathy. How to I remember when Paul Bloom won the Twitter meme game a couple of years ago, like ruin a date in 4 words or less. And he just quote tweeted it saying, I wrote against empathy. Mic
Yeah,
drop.
there you go. But I think flourishing, broadly speaking, um, if we think about what are human beings that we admire and moments in a human life that we admire, are when human beings express or do things that I don't know, we find beautiful and we find sort of the peak experience of humanity. So think about a gymnast, think about a great soccer player, um, and think about a great artist of some sort. I think you can point to those things and you admire them, and that's what I call flourishing. But then there's probably an even deeper thing, which is this is going to sound a bit too much, but love is flourishing. Why do we admire experiences or scenes when we witness somebody, like when we witness charity in front of our eyes, or we witness self-sacrifice, or just doing good in front of our eyes? Um, I don't know why. I mean, we can speculate, but I think that's flourishing. That's human beings at their best. So, in a way, in that apocalyptic scenario that you're talking about, um, there would still be a situation where human beings can love. There would still be a spark of flourishing humanity, more than just talking, like Faulkner said, and that would be a hopeful sign.
It's a little bit like that Leonard Cohen song, The Future, right?
Yeah,
He says, I see
I'm
the
obsessed with
future.
that song.
Rather, and yeah, it's beautiful. And then love's the only engine of survival. Uh,
Hmm.
I'm so curious about this, when it comes to wisdom of crowds, because, I think the first conversation I ever had with Sam Kimbrell, who is one of the other pillars of your community, he was reading this Philosophy of End Times book and explained to me, his quite apocalyptic philosophy. You write about this, you write about the potentials for the future of turning into a dystopia. Shetty writes a lot about hell. There is a kind of
And you haven't
almost,
even gotten to Demir yet, who's
yeah.
the darkest of all of us.
There you go, there you go, and the least in the least categorizable way as well. And I'm so curious how, like, what makes Wisdom of Crowds and you guys so into the apocalypse stuff? Like, is this a kind of uniting feature there that you fear this? What makes you so sure that it's going to happen? Or is it something that's, and I'm going to say only, but I don't mean only, that it's only an aesthetic, which is that a
Yeah.
representative container of your moral stance that is easy for people to, feel viscerally because it's a vibe. So is it just a vibe? Or is there some very specific events that you guys are worried about? And how did this
Yeah.
start? Was it like a very bad trip somewhere in the forest in Virginia? Take us back to where it started.
That is a very astute observation that I had never thought before, and I thank you for that. We are all obsessed with the end of the world. I dare say we're not the only ones in media and in general right now. But it is true that we're very obsessed with, yeah, that we even had an event called Parenting or Parenthood in the End of the World. I just wrote
That was
about,
fun. Yeah, I saw
yeah,
the ad for that and I thought, wow, what a fun event. Let's go.
this,
It should have
yeah,
been
they're a
like
lot
if
of
I,
fun.
if I had organized that, it would have been like parenting at the end of the world, open bar.
Exactly. Well, there was an open bar, in fact. But no, but it's funny then. Why the hell did you invite me to the Hope Axis? No, just kidding.
Because that's why I'm the most curious, like how is an organization with that aesthetic, which by the way is really appealing. I mean, Shadi was an intern tech multiple times, and I love investigating this. I think we all have it, right? You guys are trying to articulate it in a very beautiful way, but it makes me curious because you're not apocalyptic from like a neo-reactionary Peter Thielian Girardian way. You are not apocalyptic in an AI doomer way. You come from a kind of center-left humanities angle, and you
mm,
just seem kind of worried in the E.M. McGilchrist
mm,
poly-crisis style.
yeah,
And when people are worried, I think that comes in a weird way from hope, because
mm,
people who don't have hope for the future are not worried. They become kind of nihilistic. People who actively worry and want to change things, that is one manifestation of an optimism because you think the future can be better.
yeah. No, that's also, well. There's a very flattering interpretation of our doomerism, but yes, I think you're right. Thank you for that. I have three answers that I think: aesthetic, political, and uh, for lack of a better word, religious. Let's start with the religious first. Let's start with the political first, because that's the most immediate one for Wisdom of Crowds. I think end times, like discourse in general, is interesting because it forces you to discuss what you've considered to be the most important things in life. So political discourse, at least in the US, is still very policy oriented. Our top guys, um, men or women that write, are very conversant in policy wonkery, and that's good. I'm not against that necessarily, but like Ezra Klein, right? He's the king of the pundits, um, and and it's easy, like, under liberalism. It's easy to sort of postpone discussing questions of value or ultimate meaning, whereas if the end of the world is imminent, you have to start discussing what you want to survive the end of the world, what you want to do until the end of the world. All of a sudden, everything becomes more immediate. Um, I think that's also, by the way, why there's so much argument in America about issues that have to do with schools and with children, because that's another area where you can't just do the liberal technocratic evasion. But with kids, you actually have to teach them particular values, X or Y, and so you can't. That discussion is always going to be more fraught. So I think for the same reason that issues related to children are important in the U.S., issues related to how we can face life given a sort of imminent end is important. As I say this,
There's a kind of
I
urgency in the let us not talk falsely now because the hour is getting late. No
exactly.
time for lies.
Exactly. That was good. And but Barbara McClay, or I think she signs her name BD McClay. She wrote an essay a few years ago about literature that has to do with climate change. And she said a lot of people that are doomer and like write really existentially anguished stuff about climate change, they're really existentially anguished about the fact that they're going to die one day, even if climate change weren't happening. And
Yeah.
she's like, this is not me saying that climate change doesn't exist, but it was
Yeah.
also like, it's a sort of displaced. So maybe that's what we're doing.
I
We're all,
love that. I have this theory. I think I talked about it in one of the other episodes that every generation since forever, since probably like prehistoric times, had been somehow obsessed with an apocalyptic event. And my theory is that it's because there's one thing that people hate more than the idea of dying, and that's dying, that you die and life goes on. And
mm,
it's so comforting that I die, but so does everybody else. So it's fine. And so we
no,
like
that's,
kind of
yeah, it's like
fantasize.
the party keeps going. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
when you leave
yeah,
a
yeah. And
party
you
early.
kind of
Yeah, yeah.
fantasize about this equalizer in the form of a meteor, in the form of a deity descending. But it's so interesting. So I spent a big chunk of my youth writing plays, screenplays, fiction before I went into more nonfiction and then organizational work. And then, of course, that in technology eventually. And a lot of my work was post-apocalyptic science fiction, and it
Mm,
was always about what survives. They were always kind of thought experiments. And it took me a while for me to go from, to realize that in the sci-fi, I'm more interested in the sci, and that fiction
mm,
was a kind of um, um, framing device so that I could think about certain things. And then at some point, I had gained enough information and knowledge and technical agility that I could just think about the thing without the framing. But
yeah,
before that, before I could run these experiments and then eventually start a company and build products and actually measure people's behavior and reaction and whether there's social utility what I'm doing, I wrote a lot of, like, I was an extremely prolific screenwriter and playwright. And a lot of my
so
work was really about like even short films. Like like one of my favorite things that I had written was the short film called The Next House, which was just this girl who's like wandering across or down the shore in England somewhere by the ocean, and she basically just goes from empty house to empty house and plays house. So like she looks around, like who lived there, photos, names, clothes. She tries things on, and she kind of enacts the imagined lives of whoever lived there as a
mm,
kind of way of coping with her loneliness. And then all goes well until one night, of course, a man arrives in the middle of the night whose parents used to live in that house and sees this girl wearing his mother's clothes. And there is this weird moment of confusion. And then is this his wife's clothes, who's who. And then they spend one night basically playing with these identities of bygone people and reignite the types of social interaction and contracts that we used to have with each other, because it's always there. Like it's not
yeah.
something you actually forget.
That,
And I think,
you, why
do a
did
lot
you
of,
abandon writing?
hmm?
Did you abandon writing for good, or might you go back one day?
I don't currently write fiction, but I never abandon my favorite topics. I'm very, very curious what survives. And I mean, your recent piece about AI basically raises the same question. Like an apocalypse is not necessarily a nuclear fallout. It can be a slow transformation of the world as we know it and everything in it. And you're asking the question, what will survive? And I found it a hopeful post because you don't position yourself as a victim. You are thinking about what to do, which
Oh
means
yeah,
that you have an agentic take on it.
I'm getting bummed out, but no, just kidding. Wait, which are you,
The one about the rose doves at the
okay, okay. Yeah. No, yeah. Well, I had a follow-up question for you though, which is, do you think when you separated science from the fiction, all of a sudden it became more optimistic and hopeful?
Not
Because,
exactly. For me, things became more hopeful maybe 1.5 years into running Interintellect.
hmm,
So the first period that I was just building and experimenting with the format between October 2016, I mean, altogether Interintellect started in 2014, but for real, October 2016. And then there was this period of experimentation until early 2019 when I started the current format of Interintellect. It wasn't yet a company. It took it another couple of months to kind of stabilize as a startup. But I was much less hopeful, and the products that I was kind of playing with between 2016 and 2019 were far more on the defensive side. They were much more about, anti-harassment, anti, always anti. And then I think, first of all, Interintellect came out of an easing of my worries when I just realized after running Interact as a side community in my life that I can do this because people will be fine, provided that certain guardrails are there and it's well kind of structured and the incentives are aligned. And then after I had been running it maybe 1.5 years, I noticed that my entire worldview had changed. Like I had become much more hopeful, much more optimistic, just
hmm,
being able to spend time with people that way and seeing the immense curiosity, decency, friendliness that people are bringing. And I recently retook the Big Five test because Olga Kazan was on Interintellect talking about her book on personality change. And
hmm,
the last time I had taken the Big Five test was in 2019. So when I started Interintellect, so you can see basically the personality change that my company had on me. And it's like two different people. Like my
yeah,
hypnosis went down, my agreeableness went up. Like you see this opening in a personality. And so I always think, I always had prepared myself for a scholarly life. I thought I would be just writing books from my bed like Proust, and getting active. And I mean, this is the Zinahit's recipe,
hmm,
getting active, actually talking to people, being there to witness their lives and participating and raising the barn together. Um, Completely changes your baseline hope, I think, and with that, your baseline happiness. But it's a lot of work. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting.
how was
Because when
that
you,
for you? So, you also come from a scholarly position. And I know we're only at the political level of your triad here,
yeah.
of the
Well, that
very
was the scholar in me giving you the
there, yeah,
triad.
but that's beautiful. So I think it's a right moment to have me ask a follow-up question before we move on to the other two categories.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Is I think you also went from a more introverted to a more extroverted type of
Yeah.
job. How did that change you and your levels of hope,
No, I think like
if at
you in
all?
a
Sorry for the loaded question.
no, no, no. I mean, I don't know if I was more introverted, but I was definitely more afraid of doing podcasts like this, for example, of the idea of not of like putting my voice out in public. Even my writing was more cautious. I guess I would do stuff for Commonweal and um, more controlled, more cautious. I think in general in academia, you're forced a little bit to manage your image a little bit more. Whereas in journalism, you sort of um, the stakes are so low that you just have to let your freak flag fly. Um, but also, I do agree with you though. There is a sort of transformation that can happen, that did happen, I think to both of us, for the better, which is a little bit throwing caution to the wind and sort of entrusting. Um, I think it's sort of like trusting your calling, right? I think one thing when I was a scholar, I was more of a sense of futility than now. Now I know that what I write is not the best and that I'm not the greatest intellectual, but I think it's what I'm supposed to do and it might help a few people. Um, I think it's also getting older and you become like just more humble by of necessity, maybe. But yeah. But the reason why I asked you that question though, about science and being more hopeful when you're actually doing science as opposed to writing science fiction is that's why in the Dowd article that I commented on, or the interview that he did with the AI doomer that I commented on, um, there is a hopefulness that scientists and technologists have that that I don't want as a sort of humanities guy to be dismissing outright. It seems too easy. And so and that paradoxically gives you more hope that we will find a way through this impasse or through the complications that AI will undoubtedly bring to us. Whereas being
I
too
mean, they do have
apocalyptic,
worries, but their worries are kind of different, right? And that's a very interesting. You know how in political science you have this thing where if you really closely analyze different texts from different ends of the spectrum of polarization, what you
mm,
find is that they are talking about different things. It's not a debate. Like different things are important for a right-wing audience than for a left-wing audience. And this is true for men and women also. So when we see polarization between the genders, it's the same thing.
yeah,
You have to really force the debate into a shared point, making it very constrained if you want to actually debate specific things. And it's
yeah,
very true about science and the humanities as well. And I'm a humanities person, so I have 3 master's degrees in very unprofitable areas of the humanities, but I work in the technology business as a startup founder. I have for many years. And so I definitely understand both sides, but they are not talking about the same things.
mm.
And you know, it
Well, I think that's where I am worried about um, some tech accelerationism or progressive technologists or whatever you want to call them. Because, okay, obviously, none of us want the whole human race to die off. Maybe a few people do. Actually, more than a few people do, sadly. But, most of us, that doom scenario, we're all against. But there's other futures that some people think are good, which I think are not good. And a future where we don't teach people how to write. We don't teach people literature. And instead we say, well, you can just type in a few prompts and you'll get this bespoke story told to you. That's not a future I want to live in. And I think the people that think that that future is okay, even welcome, are people that don't value culture the way that I do. And for whatever reason, I don't think they're evil people or my enemies or anything. But I think that you're right that there is a very they're talking about different things. But I came across this like small startup on Facebook, and like somebody I know, I think somebody I once knew started it, and it was like they're designing a little AI or appropriating an AI, and it was like you put some prompts and it creates a bedtime story for your kid, and it's magic because you put the prompts and whatever your kid exactly wants a story about, it'll generate one for you. But I was like, that's just called telling a story. And instead of having an AI do it, you train your own brain by reading fairy tales, and then you can make up your own. By the way, you also have to make up your own kid through a biological process. So I was like, why can, that's the future that I don't want to live in. But at the same time, being just apocalyptic about technology in general, it, you know, it seems foolish because obviously, and we look what we're using right now to connect. But by the way, oh sorry, go ahead.
no. I'm just processing. I always wonder also what people are talking about when they are talking about technology and the technology wants this or that. Like I work in tech, I read everything probably
Mm.
that people are putting out because I'm very curious. And I never read anywhere that anybody in technology would want people to stop writing stories, for instance.
Right. Sam
There's
Altman actually said the other day that in
who?
5 years, Sam Altman said the other day that in 5 years, the top novel in the United States will still be written by a human being. I don't think it's like they want this, but there is. I don't know. You know better than I do, but it seems like there's a big drop off in education in the humanities.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, obviously, all of my work is about bringing people back to the humanities, but I'm also very curious about how technology can be utilized for that. I
Yeah.
mean, just in preparing for this podcast, I used AI.
Right.
because it was faster and more accurate than anything else I could have used. This doesn't mean that the two of us don't come together and have a communal experience talking about our obsessions. It just might mean that it can be a better quality and more enjoyable for people. And the listeners will also learn more from it.
Hmm.
And in some sense, we benefited. But I agree that the a lot of the worries when it comes to, for instance, AI, but this is true about all very powerful technologies, from urbanization technology to nuclear reactors or weapons. That what we worry about are second and third order effects. What you worry about is the unintended consequence, where you do want to create a tool for a writer, a novelist, to double check their writing. Like every time I write something, I always ask, oh, three, how am I wrong? Like point
Yeah.
out where I might be illogical. And it does, right? It's not a human being, so I can actually take feedback from it and or reject the feedback sometimes. But the abuses here are so easily possible, easily achievable, that knowing human nature, there's a lot of room for worry. One thing that does worry me about this is there's this common adage that the difference between left and right is that the left doesn't understand how the right thinks, but the right understands how the left thinks. And I think there is something there. I mean, being from the humanities myself and being a kind of messenger between these two worlds, I have often found that tech people understand humanities people and humanities people don't understand tech people.
Mm.
So a lot of tech people, especially like really successful, I mean, they are successful for a reason, are supremely well read. I would say more or better read than a lot of people in the humanities, and more widely. They could, in a couple of months, complete a humanities master's with very little problem. The reason why they don't do it is because they're just not interested or want to do something else. Whereas sometimes, I read humanities takes on technology that, go back to Walter Benjamin and McLuhan and places where like were super important and groundbreaking at like earlier incarnations of technology. But what I'm waiting for is the kind of hubristic new technological take. Like, who is the Zizek today? You write about Palia. Who is the Palia today? Like, we have amazing humanities writers. I mean, Celeste Marcus, Becca, Phil Cly. I mean, we have forces of nature in America today that I love reading, even from the right. I mean, I think Richard Hanania is a formidable writer in terms of prose. Like, you don't have to agree with him, but he's a really, really fucking good writer. But I wonder, who is the Caesar? Who will step up to be the kings and the queens of the humanities? Who will write?
Me, I am the Caesar.
You are the Caesar. Who will write the works of like 2026? Like,
Yeah.
come on. I wanna
But do you so I think
run out of the auditorium scandalized, and then in my car be like, Eureka, holy shit, this person was super right. They understand technology in a way that even people who work on technology don't understand. Like, do you see as an editor, as an extremely online person, like, do you see that there is movement there? I'm always seeking, like, Anastasia Berg, genius. She's just coming back to Interintellect to talk. We have a debate actually about AI with Hollis Robbins.
I'd be curious what she has to say about that. Yeah. I'd be curious what Anastasia Berg has to say about it.
She wants
she's
AI
interesting on every topic.
academia so hard. She's like, fuck AI, has no place in academia.
Oh, okay.
So it will be a debate.
Yeah. No, I think a few things. Two thoughts. One is the problem with AI right now. It's not intrinsically bad, but we who have already had the gift of having had a humanistic education can use AI now, just like we can use Wikipedia in amazing ways that enrich our lives. We can write a text and then ask AI to grade it, or correct it, whatever. Excuse me. But those people that are growing up now, and if they do not receive the same type of education that we received on how to write an essay, they're not going to benefit from AI. Instead, they're going to be atrophied. or not even atrophy, because atrophy implies that you had a muscle you're not using. Like they're just not going to
You
learn.
will be
Where
underdeveloped.
yeah, and imagine there's a difference between exploring a library and exploring Wikipedia. Wikipedia is pretty interesting. Exploring an AI, I don't know. I haven't done it really. Maybe it's similar, but I don't know. Matthew Walter, the editor of The Lamp, he wrote an essay about how he reads 100 pages a day. But in the essay, he confesses to something else, that he like burned his eye, like his eyesight suffers because he spent so much time as a kid reading from Gutenberg, the website, all these old texts. So maybe the internet can make literary people. I don't know. But the other thing I was going to say is this: who is the McLuhan or whatever? Um, I don't know. It's not me, but Alan Jacobs, by the way, could maybe be one. But you know who I think actually is the people we should go to are musicians that are all that out for decades now have been combining the computer and the human. I'm old, so I don't know. But for example, I do love Radiohead, and Tom York especially loves electronic music. But he uses computers in his art, like um, uh, plastic arts, right? Paintings,
For those of
and
us only listening to the audio, there is a Kid A book right behind Santiago.
oh, that's right, that's right.
To prove his thumb York alignment.
Yes, and he says in an interview like my music is shit when it's only the computer, and my paintings are shit when they're only the computer. But at the same time, he's completely committed to the computer. I mean, whatever the computer might be, the software. He always explores latest days. So like they've already been making a synthesis, and I imagine it's not just them. I mean, there's people that are younger than me that know music now. So maybe the question is just to have them articulate, to have someone that can articulate the synthesis that these musicians have already been making. And I
Uh,
think, by the way, music is probably
yeah,
better than
Grimes.
plastic arts.
Maybe Grimes is the Walter Benjamin of
Ah,
life. We just don't know how to,
is
take.
it? I tried listening to her music. I couldn't get into it, but she has been on podcasts. Like, she's the
And she's a
closest to our
theoretician. Like
world.
her tweets analyze the world in a way that I find very novel and extremely
Mm.
astute. So
You should get
Grimes
on
is
this podcast.
I would love to. She follows me on Twitter. Maybe
No, there you
I
go.
will tell her that we were talking about her, and then she will soften and come on the Hope Access. All right. This was just the political.
Oh, that's
This was the thesis. Let's
mhm.
go to the synthesis. Do you want to do aesthetics or do you want to do religion fast?
Aesthetic. Let's see.
All right, let's do it. And then religion will be the synthesis, like in Hegel,
Yeah,
and then in
yeah,
Girard.
yeah. Exactly.
It's inescapable, guys. You
Yes.
touch the dialectic, and you will end up with Jesus. Many such cases. Prove me
Um.
wrong, Santiago. Tell me it's
Um.
so.
All right. Well. So aesthetic. So. Um. I'm gonna say something even more cringe than Radiohead, which is The Doors. The band from the '60s that our great grandparents listened to. But
I
I
listened
remember.
to it when I was uncool teen. Come on.
Yeah, but you're a European. Europeans like, just like they like Faulkner, they like '60s music. But here it's considered
All right.
very cringe. But no. But what was I gonna say? Oh no. So I read an essay once. Put it in the show notes because I can't remember the author, but it was about the Doors. And he said the apocalyptic is a sort of like the easiest emotion that an artist can exploit, and that's almost ruined the Doors for me because a lot of their music is, or a lot of their great songs have this sort of monumental build up to them, and this sort of shout and this sort of revelation at the end. So like in the end, where at the end he's like, "Mother, yes, son, I'm going," and when the music's over, even all their hits, unless they're about love and sex and dating and women, they're about apocalypse. And also a lot of the '60s classic songs are also apocalyptic, like "Give Me Shelter." So then I was thinking about that. I read this like
I mean, it was
10 years
a very
ago.
fucked up decade, right? Like you think that it's now when a lot of things are happening, but if you look through the timeline of the 60s in America, I mean, just
Yeah,
imagine opening the newspaper or just switching on the TV every day and shit was happening.
yeah, yeah. And if you think about it, most of that music is created after the Cuban Missile Crisis, which probably left a mark on a lot of psyches everywhere. Um, but um, but it also sort of ruined the music for me because I was like, this is kind of a cheap emotion. So maybe that's why we're into the people in Wisdom of Crowds. We're into the apocalypse because it's a very thrilling aesthetic emotion that, unless it has more thought behind it, can become kind of cheap, like the Doors. Although the Doors are still good, so
But you
it's
use it as a kind of framing device, right? And I never
yeah,
really thought about this urgency, but there is an urgency to it. And there's an urgency to, I mean, the whole call of Wisdom of Crowds, which is that, agreement is nice, but disagreement is better. That you
mhm,
want to disagree because in normal times, you don't want conflict, you want peaceful coexistence, and you don't want to like rock the boat. But when so much is at stake, I mean, goes the narrative surrounding your organization's vibe, you can disagree because we need to solve a problem,
yeah.
right? Like
Well,
a
and I think the other idea there is that Shadi insists on a lot is consensus. We're against consensus. That was the other part, and that's because premature consensus, or even consensus at all, if you ask some people, excludes a lot of voices, a lot of people, and at least in our website, we want it to be a place where there can be a more raucous um, hearing of all views. Now, obviously, are we perfect at that? No, but it's the sort of guiding spirit.
who's the most disagreeable person in your team?
Um, I can't answer that. Ask me. No, just kidding. It's probably me. Probably me, to be honest. I can be very disagreeable. Monday mornings, especially. Ask Sam.
I can't imagine
Um,
being disagreeable. You're right. Is he the peacemaker of the crew?
um, I'm also the peacemaker. In fact, it's a very difficult role that I have. Most disagreeable, but the peacemaker. No, but yeah, no. So then the religious. Let's get it over with because the
Let's go.
listeners
So
are.
I said before we go there, if you wanted to explain to like an alien visiting to go back to the Henry Oliver episode's premise, what the vibe of Wisdom of Crowds is, how would you frame it?
Raucous. The disagreement is better. I think no, you can read our about page. There's like three stools. It's all about threes with me, okay? Um Pulling them up because we fought a lot. We publish podcasts and essays about first principles at stake in politics and culture. We take today's issues and debates and boil them down to their core ideas and assumptions. We publish work that is honest and vulnerable. That's the vibe. But to really get the vibe, you have to listen to the podcast, especially when it's a Demir and Shadi episode, because those guys, the sort of core spirit of it, because they founded it, and and it's interesting though the disagreements that Shadi and Demir have, and then that later Christine and Sam and I sort of share in, um, they sort of echo through everything we talk about. So like Shadi's a more moralistic, in a good sense, political point of view, and Demir is a more sort of realist, quote unquote, um, point of view, and it bleeds into everything that they talk about.
It's so funny because I mean, for me as an Eastern European, you guys are not fighting at all.
Yeah,
It doesn't even hit my lower like benchmark for what counts as a disagreement. I mean, there are beautiful discussions, and it's great that it's not fake discussions where people are just agreeing and they pretend that they discuss something and then tap themselves on the back, but they are not conflicts.
right. It's yeah, no, it's I mean I yeah. Uh, Also for Latin American, we yell a lot more, but also it's a podcast. You have to be pleasant. People don't want to hear people shouting on a
No,
podcast.
I do want to hear people shouting.
No,
Have you been on YouTube? But they do. They
that's
love
yeah,
that stuff.
that's a
They
good
love
point.
that stuff.
Also,
But
Fox
it's
News
hard
is a
for
lot of
us as well. I mean, I started doing debates on Interact, and they are a very
mm,
different genre. But I feel like at least Interact always attracts people who are just extremely curious. So even when there is a disagreement, people usually end up just interviewing each other about why you think what you think, and it becomes a kind of anthropological experiment, which I find very endearing. But I
yeah,
think, having two participants who are at least aligned on wanting to find the truth and the best method that might be achieved will have very different kinds of conflicts. So compared with people where even the framework and the cause and the incentive are under dispute. Maybe this is
hmm
why a lot of scientists, not all of them, but a lot of scientists are more optimistic because their conflicts tend to be less or identity based in a different way than the kind of tribal structuring within the humanities. Um,
yeah,
and being proven wrong in science is a completely different thing than in, say, literary scholarship. And
yeah.
the methodology, the social cost, the platform on which these things are published, reputation, self-defense, all these things work very, very differently. It's always worth investigating the social sciences as they tend to be a kind of amalgam of both of science and the humanities in many ways, or law, like, just legal opinion.
hmm
And you can kind of see how, oh, in the synthesis, do you see the you see the dialectic again? But it's an interesting. I think one of the great tasks of this century is to depolarize science and the humanities. I think this is a very sorry affair. I think the way academia is structured and financed is largely responsible for a lot of the ills of the
mm.
land. I mean, I work a lot on it. I know you guys do too. If we will find the truth, it will be in some of the clashings there. And so I always want more humble people in the sciences and more hubristic people in the humanities to kind of level the field and maybe match the tone there. Let's go to a religion. I'm so curious. We have about 5 minutes left, 10 minutes left of our time.
No,
I just want to hear how
the grand finale.
what your hope is, or the religious, at
Yeah.
least striving for hope
So I
might.
hope I remembered what I was gonna say. That was like an hour ago.
You can
So
improvise.
why are we
We will
obsessed with the
no
apocalypse and
intro.
wisdom of crowds? I gave the political, the aesthetic, and the religious. The religious is just because you know what apocalypse means. Apocalypse, the revelation. The last book of the Bible is the book of Revelations, but in Greek it's apocalypse. I don't know, apocalypsus probably. Um, and in Spanish, by the way, it's apocalypsis. So the word is a little bit less shocking, maybe in Spanish, because you hear it more often. But I think that there's just a natural desire for light to shine over our lives and over history and to finally understand what the hell is going on. And even a negative apocalypse, like a doomer scenario, has a sort of revelatory effect, right? It reveals human beings as disposable, I guess, or it reveals something about our destiny. Um, some like singularities also like that. Um, so naturally, yeah. And also, like stories, according to Aristotle, one of the key structural components is revelation, in the sense of going from ignorance to knowledge. Like somebody reveals their true identity, or something like that. And there's a reversal in action. So I think we just want that, but for all of history. So naturally, you're oriented, for political, aesthetic, and religious reasons towards the apocalypse. QED. I thought this was supposed to be about hope. We spoke about the end of the world the entire time.
I was thinking of titling the whole episode "Hope for End Times." That's going to be the
Yes.
title.
Yeah.
This is so interesting. So basically, this is the kind of collective and spiritual equivalent of when people say, "Oh, something bad happened to me, but at least I learned a useful lesson." So
Hmm.
basically, in a crisis, we get to see the truth. We get to be more honest. We get to disagree more and find out the reality about each other. Agnes Collard was my previous guest in the last episode, and she has this beautiful rule in her marriage that she actually presented to us during an interact song with Liz Brunig at Yale last year, where she and her husband have this rule that if a fight gets really vicious, if you develop this kind of fog of war in the situation and you can't calculate because you're in a
Hmm.
crisis, you can't see clearly. The only rule is that you have to speak the truth,
Hmm.
because we lie, we embellish, we euphemize because we want to kind of manipulate the other person into doing something. We are calculated, right? Like everybody does that, from small children to, you know, people on their deathbed. It's part of human nature. But when you're in a full crisis, when you're completely disoriented, you can't manipulate because you don't know what's happening. You don't know which way is forward. And so
Hmm.
the only thing you can do is to be truthful. When I turned
Yeah.
50, I made a vow that I don't know anymore. I I have been wrong so many times in my life. All I can do is be truthful. And I basically made this vow to never lie again. I mean, unless, I don't go up to people in the street that, hey, you are ugly, but like, when asked. Um,
But
and
if they asked you, you would tell them the truth.
I would have to tell them, yeah.
Yeah. No,
I
I
would
think
make them
with
feel good about it, like, hey, but you count as beautiful in this other culture or in this other subculture. I don't know. I would
yeah.
figure it out. I'm creative, but it would be
Or
very.
on the inside.
But
Yeah.
I live in New York
Um,
City, so it would not be the weirdest thing that this happened to this person today. Whatever you do, right? It's in the competition
right.
years to be the weirdest here. So I'm safe.
Yeah.
But there is this. I agree that there is um, a transcendental value to truthfulness that we often disregard in this era of self-promotion or self-branding, and everybody's trying to be legible and like palatable and find your type and whatever. And obviously AI will be hugely helpful in further typifying people. Uh,
Hmm.
and I do think that perhaps the best service that we can do toward each other is to serve the truth.
Yeah. It
Or
is. It is interesting. We all find consolation in not even the content of the truth, but just in telling the truth or accepting the truth. There's something relaxing almost about it. Like you're passing. Well, it's the truth.
yeah.
That's interesting. That's interesting to think about. That's the other thing. Maybe I hope. I hope listeners and I hope you will one day be able to say that the Wisdom of Crowds uh, staff is as obsessed with the truth as they are with the end of the world.
If that's not the same, right? Provided it's
Ah,
not the same. Okay, as an outro question, I love to ask
good.
my
That's good.
guests, Santiago Ramos, tell us it's 2030
Mm.
and we look back on 2025. What is something that will be obvious to everybody in 2030 that is already obvious to you today?
So it is, you have to be hopeful, right? Because this is,
I
I
mean, it's up
think,
to you. This is like you take it wherever
I
you
think
want.
this is, I think
You can
hope.
say that Radiohead is still touring. I don't know.
Well, the Radiohead is. It'll be obvious to everyone that Kid A was the greatest album of the 21st century. No.
We'll have to fight about this, like Latin
So
America.
is this like a moral question?
That.
I do think we might hopefully be more ashamed of the exploitation that has like, when you hold up your cell phone, there's a lot of workers that were exploited um, for the sake of building that cell phone, and we'll be more ashamed of the sort of supply chains that made modern life possible. I think that's probably the case. And yeah, because I feel like it's something that people have. It sort of lives in this liminal space in our conscience, and it'll go into the central space, and we will be more ashamed of that. Um, but that's kind of a downer to end on.
I think it's very hopeful. Musa Garbi
Yeah.
was on the podcast last October, I think, or last September. And in his book, We Have Never Been Woke,
Mm,
there's a kind of apocalypse in the sense that this revelation comes to him when he moves to New York City. He was actually living quite close to where I live on the Upper West Side. And, he comes from more humble beginnings. And this realization that, oh my God, New York is actually two cities. There is the city of users of other people's labor, and then there are the laborers. And he felt extremely bad about this, about the people who were driving his Uber and delivering his food and looking after his children. I mean, as a new immigrant, when I first left Hungary, I worked in the service industry for many. I mean, it took me 10 years to kind of get back up on my feet as an intellectual. And that for me a little bit kind of fuzzied this demarcation line. But I think for people who were from birth socialized into just expecting that in the Downton Abbey system, they are upstairs, have a hard time seeing downstairs. And I hope
mm,
to write that in this great shakeup of the world and through these revelations, we will see each other better. People who inhabit the thing we call society.
yes. Amen.
Amen. That's our hopeful note. This was a very end of times episode. You're welcome, listeners and viewers. This is not something that happens every day on the Hope Axis. Santiago, thank you for bringing us your knowledge and your intellectual humility and your very active hope. This is an active hope, which tells people to get your shit
Absolutely.
together,
Yes.
get down to work.
Just, yeah, I have hope. I know we talked a lot about the end of the world, but I have a lot of hope. So thank you so much, Anna. This was wonderful. And yes, wish you every success with Interintellect.
And follow wisdom of crowds. Thank you for
Great.
listening and watching, guys.